Hello, Jane. How are you?
Hello, Andrew. I'm good. How are you? It's good to see you.
Likewise, likewise. Really fantastic to catch up again. And what are we doing today, Jane?
We're doing a movie we've been chatting about for a while, but just never got around to it, which is the King's Speech about King George, who surprisingly became king. He shouldn't have been, of course. But it is a wonderful, wonderful film with some great actors and a wonderful script.
Indeed, yes, I can't disagree. I remember watching it in the cinema, and I watched it again earlier this week when much to my joy, I knew we were going to be doing this one. Of course, question straight away to all of you guys. Hello, by the way. How many of you have seen this film? And if you haven't seen it, please go and watch it. Just pause this video. We'll wait while you go and watch it and
Fine,
come on
you wait.
back.
All good. You're so right. It's a wonderful film, and we were just chatting before we press record, and surprisingly accurate historically as well. And there's so many things to discuss around this. But Andrew, just to set the scene a little bit, we are of course in Britain in the 30s, and we are in a time of kind of post World War One trauma, I guess I can call it, because Europe was still, and Britain, of course, was still psychologically recovering from World War One. And if there was one thing that Britain was deeply concerned with, it was avoiding another war. And then, of course, you had the rise of fascism and Nazi Germany, and of course, by 1939, Hitler had already annexed Austria and invaded Poland. So that's kind of the backdrop. And then, of course, in Britain, you have the 1936 abdication crisis on top of that. And you have a rather reluctant Bertie who has to take over the throne. So there is quite a lot happening, and then we have a wonderful story between Bertie and his speech therapist Logue in the midst of all this. So that's kind of the time and era we are finding ourselves in.
Yes, absolutely. It's an incredible roller coaster, and you'd almost, I mean, it would be an amazing story if it was the story of a strong, self-confident king steering a country through really troubled times. But of course, we have, as you say, we've got Bertie who stutters terribly and has the speech defect, and I love it because although you're right, the backdrop of the film is the clouds darkening and things are looking really, the end of the film is effectively the beginning of the Second World War. So the wider story is not getting any more hopeful. But yet within that, you have this wonderful story of an individual who, when you strip away the fact that he starts as a prince of a very important royal household, and by the end of it has become king, and is doing his best with this, it's a very unfortunate defect, if I can use that awful word from the time to have. You definitely don't want it when you're king because you have to do a lot of public speaking. And it's just this wonderful feel-good story, I find, of how he meets this challenge with the help of this wonderful man, Lionel Logue. And you see him from, I mean, it's such a powerful scene, the opening of the film, where his job is to give us the closing speech at the British Empire exhibition, which finished in 1925. And even though it was my second time watching the film last night, when I saw him with that massive crowd of people and that little microphone box with its angry, little, sort of looming at him, almost threateningly, and he just goes. Now, I've never listened to a recording of the actual speech. I know they exist, but many people describe it as equally painful for Bertie and for his audience, and it really comes through so powerfully. And I always get a twinge watching him there because I just think you poor guy. And it's at an age, it was still very much that kind of world where, as a leader, you had to be a strong, confident man, and a good public speaker. I'm sure there was an undercurrent of sympathy for him, but at the same time, many people would have been looking at him going, nope, hopefully
Yeah.
that one will never
And
become
you
king.
mentioned some really important things there, Andrew, because there is the rise of radio as a medium here, which meant that you could literally go out live to everyone, not just people in a stadium, but everyone in the realm. And when you have a speech impediment, that's a really, really hard job to do. Because you have to make yourself known and, as you say, powerful and unifying through your voice. And if that voice is not your best weapon, it's a really, really horrifying situation. And then you say, and the film is doing this beautifully, that use of those huge round microphones, almost as they use it as symbolism very well. Also, that little red lamp in the studio that goes off from time. It's like a glaring eye, isn't it? There's a lot of symbolism in just stepping up to that thing, and you can barely see people because it's this huge head in front of you. There is a that barrier, and you feel it it's very palpable in the film, that microphone fear that it's right there in front of you and you know how to speak into it. So it's wonderfully done in the film, and as you say, it's almost you fear the microphone more than this huge stadium of people.
Yes.
It's not really the people who you are afraid of. It's talking into that thing.
Yes, yes, and I think and many people watching the film would have felt a connection because I know most of us, when you're confronted by something like that, and especially when it's live, you rightly say, it's a live broadcast. That little scary voice in your mind is going, "Don't mess it up, don't mess it up," and uh,
And
and then you skip on your first sentence, and the little voice goes, "Oh, you messed it up. How is the rest of this going to go?"
And you mentioned another thing as well, Andrew, that's really important because back then, and we had this about many other things like dyslexia and something like that as well. If you couldn't express yourself, a lot of people regarded you as being unintelligent. If you didn't know
Yeah.
how to express yourself and of course you expected that from a leader and a king, that of course he would be able to do that. So I understand he had to go through a lot, including within his own very strict upbringing. That poor Bertie, he's clearly not as clever as his brother, and I understand why that could have been a thought, because obviously, of course they knew about stuttering, but it was still something that was regarded uh, uh, um, as a failure in a way, a skill you didn't have, a skill you didn't possess in a way, if you couldn't communicate properly.
Yes, and I remember those equally painful scenes where George V is he brings this whole attitude of his generation as well. All you've got to do is just push through it. So let's have a practice. Here you go, boy. Here's a microphone on it. Now speak into it. Go on, man. And actually, I find that bit hard to watch because there you get poor George V, and I say poor George V because in his own mental framework he thinks he's being encouraging, and
Yeah.
then you get poor Bertie who's desperately trying his best, and every 5 minutes George is going, "Well, just speak into it, man. Just be confident." And he's just like, "No, leave me alone." and,
Although they're really hard scenes, but again, that was how you paced children. That was
yes,
how you push them. That go on, I have to make you, I turn you into a man. Go on.
yeah,
And that was how you approached it. And also, of course, when you hear about him later, he's talking, or rather singing, to Lionel about his childhood and his nanny. You really feel for him, and you get to realize that obviously Lionel is onto something, because he's not just treating a speech impediment, he's actually treating a trauma that goes back, and a lack of confidence that was embedded in him from very early age. And of course, you have to touch on that as well, because it goes back, doesn't it, to all of that.
yes, yes. I think skipping ahead to a point later in the film, there's a very significant moment where Edward very, very cruelly mocks him. And you get the, I mean, I think it's meant to drop the hint that that was a fairly common thing when they were younger. And the contrast between the two, because for all the foolish mistakes he made in his life, Edward was always, the vivacious, outgoing, supremely confident prince.
Yeah.
And poor Bertie was always a bit of a shyer lad, I'll put it
Yeah.
that way. Yeah.
And you
Possibly disappearing into his brother's shadow, really.
and which was not unusual, when you were second born. And I think you can, when you listen to some of the original speeches from King George, you can actually hear that hesitation. And I think what Logue managed to do, apart from doing a lot around the stuttering, he managed to turn that slowness into a almost like a dignified approach. Because if we compare to, I mean, a lot of other speakers, public speakers at the time, if we go to someone like a Mussolini or a Hitler, who was almost like had this impulse of aggression when they talked, and they were all arms and hands and shouting. And this is a very, very opposite approach to that. And I actually think he managed to turn that insecurity into almost a slow dignity in the way that he managed to teach Bertie how to speak through those speeches. And it's interesting also when you listen through the original speech, not in the film, but the actual King's speech. He is starting out very slowly, and then the speed picks up as he gains more and more confidence through that speech. You can actually hear that, which is very interesting to notice once you've seen the film. That he grows, his confidence grows throughout that speech. You can hear that. And that is interesting to listen to, and it gives him a different form of dignity, I think, and strength in his speeches. And if you had listened to that speech, abroad maybe, or from anywhere in the UK, I think you would have felt it unified you, and it somehow made you more, yes, this is a dark hour, this is a grave situation. We're facing this thing for the second time for most of us. But you would have felt comforted, I think, after having listened to that.
Yes, and I've always liked that it provides a direct. You very rightly raised the example slash specter of Hitler and Mussolini and their public speaking style. It's a wonderful way of setting oneself up in opposition to them through contrast. And I think it does make his speeches so much more powerful. As you say, they're delivered in that measured, dignified tone, um, as against our ideological enemies at the time who were ranting and screaming and waving their arms. And okay, if that does it for your followers, then good for you. But we're not like that. We represent something different.
I know, of course, he had his Britishness about him and all of that, but I can sort of see why that very stark contrast must have actually created a very calming effect, and how his speech, how his stuttering was actually maybe used in a way that could benefit that. And it's
Yes.
also interesting. I mean, Colin Firth did a wonderful job. But it was also interesting to see how we get to know in the film that there are certain letters, like the letter P, he struggles with. And every time there was a P word coming up, Logue would have put in a line in the script to make him pause and lean into the word. And you can sometimes hear him go, people, or something. He's sort of leaning into that word a little bit. And actually, I wanted to mention this as well, because I watched this in a documentary that they got, when they for this film, they got in touch with Logue's grandchild, who had a lot of his granddad's letter correspondence with the king. And apart from revealing a very close friendship and a great sense of humor between the two of them, it also he had in his private papers, Logue, the speech where he had put in the notes for the king. And you can see these little vertical lines where he wanted the king to pause. And when you look at it, you first wonder a bit because it's places where you wouldn't naturally pause, but it's places where he wanted the king to lean into a word. And it's
Oh,
always in front of a
amazing.
key word like my people or we shall prevail. There is always that little, lean into it kind of thing. And it's you can hear it when you listen to the original speech that he's clearly doing that. And it actually worked in a very wonderful way.
Oh, amazing, Jane. Do you know what? I mean, I have heard a recording of that speech, the declaration of war speech or the state of war speech, but that was years ago. And my memory is a bit rusty. I'm going to go and listen to it later because I'm going to listen out for those now.
They did a wonderful job in the film trying to replicate that, and also the as I said, the slowness, the insecurity he started out with, and then slowly as the speech, it's about a 5 minute long speech, I think. As it
Yeah.
slowly progresses, he's clearly picking up speed a little bit. And gaining more and more confidence as he goes through it. And then there was a wonderful little thing actually that the actors picked up on, which was in the letter correspondence that Logue's grandchild had. The line where Logue is saying to the king after the speech, "You still stuttered on the W," and the king goes, "Oh, I had to throw in a few, so they knew it was me."
Oh, yes, that is wonderful. And
That
it's
exchange, sorry, that exchange is actually a letter correspondence between the two.
oh,
So that
okay.
existed, and the actors insisted that they put that in somehow, that little exchange between them.
I think that is a wonderful choice, and I'm so glad they did. I didn't realize that. I remember the line. It's one of my most favorite moments from the film because it did make me smile, and it speaks beautifully to the shared sense of humor that the two friends enjoyed. I also quite liked because it happens around the same time. It's when Churchill, Timothy Spall makes his very brief appearance as Churchill, and he's either congratulating the king or it's just before you see my memories rotting up already. And he hints at the fact that he himself said, but I turned it into an advantage. And I just think, well done. And also that lovely moment where you think, okay, so, here's someone we remember as an incredibly confident public speaker who yet obviously had something that he had to deal with at some
And
point
actually,
in his life.
I don't know if that is true or not, if Churchill did, but he might have done. He
Hmm.
very easily have been. I don't know. Do you know about that, Andrew? If
No, no, I hadn't. It wasn't something I'd ever been aware of until the film put it in. But they get so much else, historically spot on in this film. I'd be very surprised if they'd include it if it wasn't true. So I need to go and do some digging on good old Mr. Churchill and see whether he did, in
But
fact.
he was the type of man who would turn that around if he had,
Yeah.
he would have somehow managed to do that. But I also love that he's saying it to the king that, you can overcome this.
Yes, yes. It's another of these, and it's something this film does so well. There's all these beautiful little moments in it that just sort of make you smile or nod approvingly or go, "Oh yeah, yeah."
Difficult thing, mixed with a very conservative royal upbringing.
Yeah.
It would not have been something that would have ever been addressed within the family that Bertie had a stutter. They might have mocked him a bit, like his brother did, but it
Hmm.
wasn't something that, just go see a therapist and he will put some marbles in your mouth and you'll learn how to speak
Oh,
properly. And when that didn't work out, you try another one. And so, and maybe it required someone like Logue without a formal therapist educational background, which he didn't have. Uh, he
hmm.
knew he was an amateur actor and he knew how to um, uh, also, when he himself had been stationed, that he knew how to put confidence back into people.
Yeah.
And maybe that was what was required more than the technical bits. in a way.
Yes, yes. Lowe carries this incredible gift for empathy, and I mean, whoever played the Doctor with the marbles did his job very well because he conveys the impression of a man who's driven purely by the science and the mechanics of the whole thing. But I detect other than the fact that he's very polite, of course, he would be to a prince of the realm, um, but it's very much that. The prince is not a patient, he's a medical problem to be solved. Whereas Logue has so much more empathy and humanity to him. And also, in fairness, I did get you see, as historical figures go, Archbishop Cosmo Lang is someone I generally admire, but I did not like his dirty dealing in the film where he tries, "Oh, Your Majesty, you know your therapist." I need to. That was not cool, Cosmo, and not cool at all. And but yes, in fairness to Logue. I need to research this a bit more, but I get the impression that a lot of the qualifications we would recognize today for treating speech impediments like this, they simply didn't exist in the 20s. It was a science that was very much in its infancy. And I think even if Logue had had the finances and the ability to obtain training, it wouldn't have given him a certificate or anything.
Probably not, no. And I think a lot of the method you used would have been method used to train wealthy children in how to speak properly. It would not have been methods that would have been used if you had any kind of impediment or stutter. It would have been like, you know, when you learn to sit up straight and that kind of thing. It would have been, there are certain things you say and pronounce in a certain way. I think it would have been part of that training. It wouldn't have been specifically training in how to avoid a stutter.
Yes.
Because I think you're right, it didn't really exist in that way.
No, and certainly, I mean, he must have been one of the earliest to recognize the need for a human touch and attack not attack the symptom, but find out what's going on. But as you said earlier, you know, finding out what's really causing this rather than just making someone speak properly.
And then another theme, Andrew, in the film is this in a very conservative time and age, this question of equality between a first prince, then king, and a commoner.
Hmm.
Insists on using his name. What do your family calls you? You know, only his very closest family calls him Bertie. And no smoking here. You know, my castle, my rules. You know, and that must have been almost impossible to try and get that through because Bertie himself would not have been used to that. It would have been wrong. You cannot have a commoner talk to you in that way.
No, it's a very funny one because yes, the other thing about this period is the whole of the British social fabric is in a stage of significant upheaval. And I know someone once said that Edward VIII's behavior advanced the cause of republicanism much more than propaganda would have done by about 50 years. Which, you know, but it hints at how, you know, there was certainly when their father, when George V first became king, there wouldn't have been as much of that. I mean, it was there, but people had this very exaggerated respect for the monarchy and the hierarchy. And that was the environment, yes, that he would have been raised in. So yes, Lionel trotting him up and saying, "I shall call you Bertie." It's just a no-no. Um, but I do find it remarkable how the royal family was adapting and so quickly as well. So that I do like that through the 20s, people actually jokingly call Bertie the industrial prince because as he takes on more royal duty, he always seems to be opening mines and factories and talking to workers. And I thought it was great that they had a scene in the film where it's the new radio plant or whatever they're making and because that's so him. But sorry, Jane, where was I going with this? Oh yes, yeah, the royals and commoners. Yes, it's a very odd one because I find it very odd that there are some circumstances where royals can rub shoulders with commoners in a way that many of their contemporaries don't in other countries. but then at the same time, yes, there is that incredibly rigid separation, and to work on something so personal with a prince. I I can imagine why someone who'd say been the royal family's physician would have felt a bit put out by this. No, no, I'm the special guy. Who is this random person that
Yeah,
you're having this?
exactly. And also something that is your insecurity,
Hmm.
and now you have to talk to someone below you about that kind of thing. But as Logue is rightly hinting at, this mentorship and therapist thing requires an equal relationship, or else it's just not going to work.
Yeah,
And I think that's his point very early on. And then he also manages to demonstrate his methods very early on during the very first meeting when he's putting on a pair of earphones and music, and he wants him to cite to read from Shakespeare. And it's a wonderful little exercise in a technical bit of it, but also in a way in distracting him from not noticing his own voice. You're so focused on this problem that you have now that, of course, it's going to be a bigger problem for you because it's all you ever think about. But if I can distract you somehow, it's a method that could maybe be useful here.
absolutely. And the look on his face when he plays the record later is just absolutely wonderful. And I think the look on his wife's face as well. She's like, oh, okay.
He got
Yeah,
they've seen so many people and he got further than all of them in just one visit.
yes, yeah, it makes for a wonderful start for them, and yes, actually, in a way, it did occur to me in the film that I know we only have that one comparison. Again, I'll call him Marble Doctor because I don't think we ever get his name, but there's also this undercurrent of, well, I'm the medical professional, Your Majesty, so you must do exactly what I tell you, and as you rightly say, for Logue, the approach is no, no, we're equals. We're going to be on this journey together, and we're going to be in step. And it's not,
Yeah.
which I think helps over time. I think it really helps Bertie to reconcile the problem you unpacked earlier, where I am a royal and this person is a commoner. And I'm relying on this person for assistance with a problem I have. This is not how it's supposed to be.
But also I think he's leaning into Logue's more maybe traditional training techniques a bit more because the relationship is more equal. So when we see him sort of doing all these weird exercises and dances and what have you, it's a wonderful little clip between we see him train with Logue and then doing public speeches where he's doing that overlap between he's maybe training like mother, and then we see him, we skip to that scene where he's doing the speech and he's doing manufacturing.
Yeah.
You can sort of see him lean into those different words as a wonderful little those overlaps. They're wonderfully done, but you could see him lean into, or maybe he's standing on his toes and he's going back on his heels and on his toes again, and he's dancing a bit back and forth. But he's using those techniques and leaning into them, I think, as his confidence starts to grow as well.
Yes, yeah. And there was one, I mean, I realized they had run out of space and time and it was such a tightly told story, but the Logue's treatment takes effect quite rapidly because he in the late 1920s he goes on a bit of he goes on one of his many overseas tours, and I think he went to, is it he presided over the opening of the Parliament in Canberra when he visited Australia in the late 20s. And they don't cover that journey in the film, which is fair enough. But it just shows how, after a few short years after his terrible time in 1925, he's already beginning to get better. I get the impression his opening of the Parliament was by no means perfect. It wasn't exactly Churchillian, but he did it. And yes, of course, he's doing the beat in Britain a lot more. So
No, it's interesting also. I think even nowadays, if you have a child stuttering, what it does to you, because of course, it's the one way we first learn to communicate with each other. And if you can't do that, you're already lost from the beginning.
Yes.
And also it's one of those things that you're almost bound to be, if not mocked about, then at least there's going to be comments from other children about it at some point. And I mean, it's never nice being mocked, and children can be sometimes very evil to one another, but it's a different thing from if you're being mocked because you're wearing the wrong shoes or you're wearing glasses or your hair is red or whatever. That's an appearance thing. And yes, it's unpleasant, but there's not really anything you can do about it. Whereas this is kind of a skill thing that's
Yes.
part of you in a different way. And if people start mocking you about something that you cannot do, it's
Mm.
something that sits very deeply in you.
Yeah.
Um, in a way. And I'm not trying to say that, one type of mocking is better than another, but it's I think it affects you in a different way when there's something you see everyone else do with ease
Mm.
and you somehow can't.
It's very demoralizing, and I know he had quite a bumpy time in his early life, particularly when he entered the services, because he starts off in the Navy. And I know he even references that in a one-liner in the film that he's a naval officer and he's not cut out for the whole kinging business.
I love that.
But yeah, his grades when he was a cadet were terrible. Well, they varied between terrible and unexceptional. And although he served in the First World War, he was invalided out with an. I mean, fair enough. He had to have a duodenal ulcer removed. That would take anybody out of circulation. But aside from one major thing where he got mentioned in dispatches at the Battle of Jutland because he was on one of the battleships during that engagement, his Navy career is quite unexceptional. But he turns it over later on to show he has a much more driven side as well. So he joins the Royal Air Force after leaving the Navy, and he becomes the first member of the royal family to become a qualified pilot. So, so there's clearly some drive there, along with the earlier point I was trying to make about how he's had quite a bumpy start, which probably had a lot to do with his confidence. So.
Oh my goodness, I didn't know that. That's quite an achievement.
It is, yes, and it shows him in other aspects of his life trying to push back against, whatever it is within him that's holding him back. Whether it's, physical ailment or the inherent worries. Because I know, no one would blame him for being invalided out of service with the Navy because of his health problems. But, I think in his mind it might have always been a bit of a sort, it fed into his insecurities.
Yes, yes. Oh, goodness me, that there is some truth in, children who or young people who had to overcome something that they if they do overcome it, they get strong in a very special way.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
it's hard to put your finger on, but there is and I suppose there has to be, if you can overcome something like that, there is a strength in you that maybe others don't really see so much because they're used to you being insecure. But 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 it's very clearly there, and hopefully you can use it as an adult.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, and of course on top of all this there's the external family stresses which can make things worse. I know he takes the abdication crisis very badly. Um,
It must have been a dreadful time as well, because obviously this hadn't happened before in this way, and you had a king who had barely been king for a year, or kinging,
yeah.
as you put it. I love that word.
Yes, I think I've invented a verb.
Kinging. And have you been doing a lot of kinging? Yeah. And I know he's portrayed a bit of like a sort of party prince in this movie, and I think he was definitely more outgoing and probably also more charming and easier to approach than poor Bertie. But the crisis that he had to take on after that, it that wouldn't have been easy, because one thing is having to take over after a brother who's now buggered off to France, but to marry a divorcee twice. Uh,
Horror.
and but another thing is dealing with the aftermath of what that did, in a monarchy and in a rather conservative society. That was a lot to take on at the same time.
Yes, yes, it was, and I honestly feel I mean, I'm fairly convinced he didn't think he was ready for that responsibility, and I dread to think of the sleepless nights it gave him as an individual. I know these days it's very popular to go, oh well, don't feel too sorry for them. They're a king. It's like, but actually, when you look at them as a human being, it's really not a good life, and in that era where so much of what you do is driven by a sense of duty, and reinforced by the fact that, important though duty and obligation are, your elder brother, who's supposed to set an example, has just gone, oh,
Yeah. It's no, it's always going to be a very peculiar occupation, isn't it? Because you're born into something that you might not be fit to, and or that you really want in any way, and you are in a way on all the time. You're never really off. I know there are lots of privileges that follow this, but you kind of always have to think about. How you condone yourself, your appearance, how you look, how you behave, what you say. You can never say anything without it being picked up by a microphone somewhere. You can never do anything without people over analyzing it.
yeah.
You are in the spotlight literally all the time.
Yes, and you often cannot be yourself, because even back then the whole concept of, reign but don't rule is a major thing, and you might become king feeling that you particularly dislike a political group, for example, but you have to keep reminding yourself that you are king of all of your people, and you are obligated even to the ones you don't necessarily like very much. And,
Exactly right. And you will be, even when whoever is in office right now politically, whenever they are gone again, you will still be kinging. You will still maybe have maybe not as many as the late Queen had, but you will have a lot of prime ministers and politicians to get through in your lifetime.
yes, yes, and the need to smile and shake their hands even when they're making a terrible mess must be quite difficult.
And you just have to carry on. And of course there will be family situations and crisis within your own family, and you have to try and carry on and deal with that in the same way most other families will, apart from the fact that your family crisis is in full public light.
Yes, yeah. A friend of mine once summed up what he thought of the experience of royalty by just saying, the food is nice, but the stress is high.
That's a very, very good way of putting it, actually.
Yeah.
I like that. I like that a lot.
Yeah. Yes. And the more practical problems of being a monarch as well. I do love that line where he says to Logue, I don't carry money.
That's a wonderful line, actually. Still owe me then.
Yeah, yeah, maybe a check or an IOU. I mean, of course, it ties in so nicely with the other encounter, which also touches on your whole bit about, commoners and royalty, where poor Myrtle Logue is going,
Yes.
and are their Majesties going to be staying for tea?
I felt her in that sentence. It was like the tensest a woman could ever be. And will they be staying for dinner?
There's nothing in that cupboard. Yeah, I think it's funny, because one of the people I'd watched the film with said, "Oh, they really ought to have stayed." And no, actually, it was better than they didn't, because that poor woman. I think I think they both sensed that she was in a sort of semi-panic meltdown while keeping the smile on. So no, we have another engagement, but thank you some other time.
I loved how she took over there, and she kind of went, the queen to, and she kind of went, oh, love to, but and you could see the relief. Okay, okay.
So it's like, I don't think we've got matching plates, or at least not enough.
Really should have done more shopping.
Yeah,
But
no,
I
it,
love that little discussion they have as well about will it be your face on the coin? Is that
yes.
one is still my father's? But yeah, eventually.
Yep. Yeah. Must be very surreal.
It must be one of those things where you have to keep a bit of a distance to it all. A little bit like if you are famous, don't Google yourself. Because it's just not, no, no.
No, it is good advice. Don't if you've got any kind of sort of presence, don't ever Google yourself.
No, no, no. I think if you became famous for something slowly, I would find it hard not to Google myself. But I think if you're born into something, you have to learn from a very, very early age. Just don't look at the front pages. Don't ever look at anything. Just carry on and
Just rise above it and just keep going. Yeah.
it'll be fine. It'll be fine.